The transmission crackled to life, filling the war chamber with a deep, guttural voice. The image on the massive holographic screen sharpened, revealing the monstrous visage of King Gilzer, a towering brute of reptilian muscle and jagged bone plates. His yellow eyes burned with condescension. "Humans," he sneered, his voice reverberating like a storm. "You scurry across the stars like vermin, yet you claim dominion over worlds. Your kind is frail, your existence insignificant. You will prove your worth or be erased." The silence that followed was suffocating. The assembled Earth Coalition leaders sat rigid, their expressions unreadable, though the tension in the room was palpable. The Gorians had already demonstrated their brutality. 3 outer colonies had been obliterated in less than a month. Millions dead. Earth's defenses barely held against their onslaught. Now, humanity was on trial not just for its survival, but for its right to exist. Seated among the brass, Captain Shane Ronald clenched his jaw. His fingers dug into the armrests of his chair. He had seen Gorian destruction firsthand, had lost men to their unrelenting cruelty. He could still hear the screams, the static-laced final words of his platoon, lost in the fall of Vega Prime. Now the enemy was knocking on Earth's doorstep, demanding submission or proof of strength. Gilzer leaned closer to the screen, his fanged maw twisting into a smirk. 30 days. That is your time. Show me that you are more than prey, or my fleet will burn your world to cinders. The transmission ended abruptly. The hologram flickered out, leaving only the soft hum of the control panels and the uneasy shifting of the room's occupants. A cough. A shuffle of papers. Then Admiral Kovacs exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "This isn't a war we can win in open conflict," he muttered. "We don't have the firepower to match their fleet." Some murmured in agreement. Others sat in grim silence. Shane finally spoke. "We're thinking about this all wrong." Heads turned. "We can't match their forces head-on," he continued, his voice measured yet edged with resolve. "But we don't need to. Gilzer gave us a choice: prove ourselves. If we take out their leader, it sends a message. Humanity isn't weak. We don't submit. We fight." A few scoffed. One of the diplomats shook his head. "Are you suggesting an assassination mission on the most heavily guarded world in the Gorian Empire? That's suicide." Shane leaned forward, unwavering. "Only if we fail." The room stilled. The logic was reckless, but undeniable. A direct attack on the Gorian capital was impossible with current resources, but a precision strike team, a small, elite force, might have a chance. The mission wasn't about destroying their fleet. It was about breaking the illusion of human inferiority. Admiral Kovacs sighed, rubbing his chin. "Who do you trust for this?" Shane didn't hesitate. Squad Alpha. They were ghosts in the field, each one a master of their craft, forged by war and hardened by loss. If anyone could infiltrate Vexor 9, it was them. The final approval came with reluctance, but in the end, there was no alternative. A stealth-class ship would be provided, their cover dependent on stolen Gorian encryption codes. The mission: land, infiltrate, eliminate King Gilzer, and send a message to the Empire. Later that night, Shane stood alone in the barracks, staring at the mission brief. The weight of it settled over him like a vice. He had led missions before, but nothing like this. The fate of his species rested on their success. A knock on the metal doorframe broke his reverie. Lieutenant Simon James stepped in, his usual stoic expression betraying a flicker of concern. "You sure about this?" Shane looked up. Simon had been with him since the Battle of Red Horizon, the only man he trusted without question. "We don't have a choice." James exhaled, nodding. "Then let's get it done." The next morning, Squad Alpha assembled in the hangar bay. The air buzzed with the scent of engine fuel and steel, the hum of maintenance crews performing last-minute checks. Each man carried his own ghosts, but today they stood united in purpose. Sergeant Raphael Briggs checked his gauntlets, the bulky soldier's arms coiled with cybernetic implants that enhanced his strength. He grinned. "About damn time we take the fight to them." Specialist Elliot Vance, their tech genius, adjusted his visor, already running calculations. "I've cracked their encryption. If my codes hold, we'll slip past their orbital defenses. If not, well, we'll improvise." Corporal Dominic Hayes, their close combat specialist, twirled a vibroblade between his fingers. "I'll take point when we breach. Keep up." Lastly, their pilot, John Ghost Caldwell, tapped the side of their sleek, black Gorian stealth ship. "I'll get you in, but once we're on the ground, we're alone. No backup." Shane scanned the team, the best humanity had to offer. He took a breath. "We all know what's at stake. This isn't just about survival. It's about proving we belong in this universe. No more running. No more begging for mercy. We show them what it means to be human." The ship's loading ramp lowered with a hiss. No further words were needed. They boarded in silence. The journey was eerily quiet, the vastness of space stretching infinitely outside the viewport. Their stolen Gorian vessel carried them unnoticed past the first layers of enemy patrols, their fates tied to the fragile trust in Vance's security breach. The Gorian homeworld loomed ahead, a planet of jagged obsidian spires and burning red skies. As they approached Vexor 9's atmosphere, an alarm suddenly blared inside the cockpit. Ghost swore. "Something's wrong. We've got a patrol fleet shifting course." Shane's stomach tightened. "Did they spot us?" Vance's fingers flew over his console. "Not yet. But they're running an enhanced scan. If they detect our energy signature, we're dead." The ship drifted in silence as the Gorian fleet loomed closer. A single discrepancy, one miscalculation, and the mission would end before it even began. The tension was suffocating. The scan passed over them. Lights flickered. Then nothing. Vance exhaled. "They bought it." Ghost smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Damn good thing, 'cause we were 5 seconds from being scrap." Shane allowed himself a breath, but the unease remained. This was only the beginning. The real battle lay ahead. As they descended toward the Gorian capital, their ship vanishing into the planet's storms, Shane's grip on his rifle tightened. There was no turning back. The descent into Vexor 9 was rough, the stolen Gorian vessel shaking under the weight of the planet's dense, storm-ridden atmosphere. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating jagged obsidian spires stretching toward the heavens like the fingers of a dead god. Beneath the thick cloud cover, the Zarek Citadel, the seat of the Gorian Empire, loomed in the distance, a monstrous fortress of interlocking towers and blood-red banners. Even from here, the place reeked of power. Inside the cramped confines of the stealth ship, the tension was suffocating. The air was thick with unspoken fears, but there was no room for doubt. Shane studied his men, gauging their readiness. They were killers, each of them honed by war, but even the best could be undone by hesitation. "We stick to the plan," Shane said, voice low but firm. "Once we're inside, no unnecessary engagements. We take out King Gilzer, transmit his death to the entire empire, and get the hell out. No heroics." Briggs snorted, adjusting the fit of his reinforced gauntlets. "Can't promise that, Cap. Some of us were born for heroics." Vance didn't look up from his datapad, fingers moving in a blur as he worked to maintain their ship's false identity within the Gorian security grid. "As long as nobody does anything stupid, we should have a clear window to infiltrate. But we're working with stolen codes. If something doesn't check out, they'll know we're here." James, ever the pragmatist, tightened the straps on his sniper rifle. "They always know," he muttered. Shane's gaze drifted toward the cockpit. Ghost piloted with his usual ease, but even he wasn't as relaxed as he pretended to be. This was the heart of the enemy's power. There was no backup. If they were caught, there would be no rescue mission. The ship's systems chimed. They were nearing the designated landing zone, a canyon on the outskirts of the Citadel, shielded from orbital surveillance by natural rock formations. Ghost guided the vessel into a near-silent hover before setting it down with barely a sound. "Welcome to hell," he muttered, powering down the ship. The team moved fast, exiting into the darkness, weapons primed. The air smelled of burning minerals, thick with the scent of iron and ozone. Overhead, the Gorian capital pulsed with activity, the occasional search drone sweeping the outer perimeter. They had to move quickly. Vance knelt by a security terminal embedded into the rock, hooking into it with a small device. The Gorian coding was intricate, their firewalls near impenetrable, but Vance was better. Within seconds, he had hijacked the system. "I'm in," he whispered. "There's a maintenance hatch 70 meters ahead. Leads to an unmonitored service tunnel." "Move," Shane ordered. They advanced in silence, their adaptive camo suits shifting to blend into the environment. The hatch was exactly where Vance had predicted, a reinforced panel built into the rock. Briggs wrenched it open with a grunt, exposing a narrow, dimly lit tunnel that snaked toward the Citadel's lower levels. Inside, the air was thick, stale. Pipes hissed with pressurized gas, and Gorian glyphs marked the walls, their alien symbols pulsing faintly. The squad moved in single file, each step precise. Any sound, any mistake could be fatal. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then they heard it, footsteps. Shane signaled for a halt, pressing his back to the cold metal wall. The sound was coming from a junction up ahead. Shadows moved. 2 Gorian sentries, armed and armored, their hulking forms almost blocking the tunnel. James moved first. His rifle whispered, a single suppressed round punching clean through the first guard's skull. The second barely had time to react before Hayes lunged from the darkness, vibroblade flashing. The Gorian gasped, clutching at the deep wound in its throat before collapsing in a heap. Shane scanned the corridor. No alarms. No reinforcements. Clean kill. "Move the bodies," he ordered. They pressed forward, emerging into a vast maintenance bay filled with industrial machinery and rows of parked Gorian patrol mechs, massive, insect-like war machines bristling with weaponry. The sight was a stark reminder of what they were up against. If they were discovered, these things would tear them apart in seconds. Vance pulled up a schematic. "We're close. Throne chamber is 3 levels up, but security is heavier from here." Shane nodded. "Then we do this fast." The squad maneuvered past the mechs, keeping to the shadows. At the far end of the bay, a heavily guarded elevator shaft led to the upper levels. Briggs grinned. "I can clear that in 5 seconds." "Not yet," Shane said. "We do this quiet." Vance motioned toward a ventilation access panel above them. "I can override the pressure system. Flood the chamber with coolant gas. It'll knock them out." Shane considered. Risky, but effective. "Do it." Vance hacked the system. A low hiss filled the air as a pale mist seeped from the vents. The Gorian guard stiffened, confused. One of them barked something in their guttural tongue before staggering. Within moments, they slumped to the ground, unconscious. Briggs let out a whistle. "That's one way to do it." They slipped into the elevator, ascending in silence. The door slid open to a gilded corridor, vast and lined with ornate Gorian statues, their eyes glowing faintly. Then came the sound none of them wanted to hear, an alarm. Vance cursed. "Damn it." System caught the override. A deep roar echoed through the chamber. From the far end, something massive emerged, a Gorian warbeast, 10 feet of armored muscle, its spiked tail dragging against the ground as it charged. Hayes barely had time to react before the thing lunged, smashing him aside like a ragdoll. He hit the wall hard, coughing blood. James's rifle barked, rounds pinging off the creature's thick hide. Briggs charged, cybernetic fists slamming into its torso, barely budging the beast. Shane fired, aiming for the eyes. The beast roared, swiping at him with claws the size of swords. He rolled, barely avoiding the strike. Vance yelled, "We need to go now." The creature lunged again, But this time, Briggs caught it, locking its massive jaws apart with raw mechanical strength. "Move, damn it," he roared. Shane hesitated. Briggs grinned through the strain. "You know what has to be done?" Shane cursed but gave the order. The squad ran. Behind them, Briggs let out a battle cry, triggering the explosives he had secretly planted on the beast's back. The explosion ripped through the corridor, shaking the very foundations of the citadel. Shane didn't look back. He couldn't. They reached the final corridor, breathless, battered. At the far end, the massive throne chamber doors loomed, carved from obsidian and flanked by Gorian elite guards. And then, as if to mock them, a voice filled the chamber, a voice Shane had not heard in years. "Victor Hale." The traitor's voice dripped with amusement. "You actually made it this far? I should have expected nothing less." Shane's blood turned to ice. Hale had been one of Earth's best, before he was presumed dead years ago. But now, here he was, alive, and speaking with the confidence of a man who had chosen the enemy. The throne doors opened. King Gilzer was waiting. The throne chamber stretched before them, vast and adorned with the crimson banners of conquest, each one woven with the insignia of a world the Gorian Empire had brought to ruin. The air was thick with the scent of burned metal and ancient blood, the oppressive heat radiating from torches set into the massive obsidian walls. At the far end, seated atop a throne carved from the bones of fallen warriors, sat King Gilzer, his monstrous form draped in regal war armor, his clawed fingers tapping the armrest in quiet amusement. But it wasn't the Gorian king who made Shane's breath catch. It was the man standing beside him, Victor Hale. Once a decorated Earth Coalition officer, Hale had been presumed dead years ago. Yet here he was alive, standing with the enemy, clad in Gorian forged battle armor, its segmented plates gleaming under the low light. His eyes, once sharp and unwavering, now carried an unsettling calm, the kind only possessed by men who had long abandoned their cause. Shane gritted his teeth. "I should have known you'd be too stubborn to die." Hale smirked, tilting his head. "And I should have known you'd be reckless enough to come here." The squad shifted into position, weapons raised. But King Gilzer lifted a massive, clawed hand, his voice a deep, guttural growl. "Do not insult me with your human cowardice. No guns. No tricks. If you wish to prove your kind is worthy, then fight as warriors." Hale took a slow step forward, unholstering a plasma-edged blade from his hip. "The king has given you a chance, Shane. Honor demands you take it." Shane's hands curled into fists. The mission had been clear. Eliminate Gilzer, send a message to the Empire, and escape. But now, standing before the greatest traitor to humanity, rage clouded the edges of his vision. "Briggs died because of this," Hayes murmured beside him, his voice tight with fury. Shane exhaled, forcing clarity. He glanced at his team, wounded, weary, yet still standing. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. He lowered his rifle. "I'll handle Hale. James, Hayes, keep the guards off me." Vance frowned. "That's a bad idea." Shane smirked. "We've had worse." Hale rolled his shoulders, amused. "You always were predictable." Then he lunged. Shane barely had time to dodge as the plasma blade slashed through the air, heat trailing in its wake. He countered with a quick strike, aiming for an opening in Hale's armor. But the traitor was fast, faster than any normal man should be. Hale caught Shane's arm, twisting sharply. Pain flared, but Shane used the momentum to drive his knee into Hale's ribs, forcing separation. They circled each other, the tension suffocating. "You're strong," Hale admitted, his voice calm despite the fight. "But you're still human?" Shane wiped blood from his mouth. "And you're a disgrace." Hale's expression darkened, and he came at Shane with brutal precision, each strike designed to break bones, not just wound. Shane blocked where he could, countered where he had to. But he was fighting against a man enhanced by Gorian engineering, a warrior who had abandoned his humanity for raw, inhuman power. Meanwhile, Chaos erupted in the chamber. James and Hayes engaged the Gorian royal guards, their movements a blur of gunfire and steel. James, ever the marksman, landed precise shots, each one dropping a Gorian warrior before they could react. Hayes moved like a shadow, weaving between foes, his vibroblades slicing through armor with ruthless efficiency. But the guards were relentless. A massive Gorian berserker, clad in obsidian plating, barreled into James, sending him sprawling. Hayes barely had time to react before another Gorian brute grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Shane saw it happen out of the corner of his eye. No time. Hale's blade lashed out, searing through Shane's shoulder. Pain ignited, but Shane didn't let it slow him down. He caught Hale's wrist, twisted, and slammed an elbow into his throat, forcing the traitor to stumble back. "You always fought with honor," Hale muttered, voice ragged. "That's why you lose?" Shane dropped low, feinting right, then drove his combat knife straight into Hale's side, twisting deep. The former soldier gasped, eyes wide, blood seeping between the armor plates. "This isn't about honor," Shane growled. "It's about survival." He ripped the knife free and slammed his fist into Hale's jaw, sending the traitor crashing to the ground. No time to hesitate. James had recovered, planting a round through the berserker's skull, while Hayes, still gasping for air, used the distraction to drive his blade into his captor's neck. Vance was already at the control panel, fingers moving in a blur. "I've got it." Disabling security locks on the throne chamber, Shane turned toward the throne. King Gilzer remained seated, watching, his massive glaive resting against the throne's side. The Gorian king finally stood. Impressive. The ground trembled beneath his weight. "Your species fights like beasts backed into a corner," Gilzer mused. "But a cornered beast is still prey." He lifted the glaive, its blade crackling with energy-infused plasma, and stepped forward. Shane barely had time to move before Gilzer swung. The force was monstrous. The air split apart, the sheer pressure sending Shane skidding across the chamber floor. He rolled onto his feet, heart hammering. Gilzer charged. Shane dodged left, barely avoiding a downward slash that cratered the stone beneath it. He fired his pistol 3 rounds center mass, but the bullets pinged off Gilzer's reinforced armor, barely leaving a mark. Then the king's tail whipped around, catching Shane in the ribs, sending him crashing into a pillar. Pain bloomed across his back, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to go down. James fired from above, but Gilzer moved with terrifying speed for his size, catching James's sniper round midair, crushing it between his claws. "Enough," Gilzer snarled, lifting his glaive high. "You have fought well, but this ends now." Shane's mind raced. He needed a weakness, an opening, anything. Then he saw it. A scar, barely visible beneath the ornate plating of Gilzer's lower left ribs, a mark from some past battle, healed but not fully armored. It was small, but it was enough. Shane forced himself upright, wiping blood from his mouth. James, focus fire on his left ribs. James, ever precise, didn't hesitate. He fired. The bullet slammed into the scarred tissue, Gilzer grunting as his movement faltered just enough. Shane moved. A blur of motion. He dodged the king's counterstrike, vaulting over the glaive, sliding low, and driving his combat knife straight into the exposed wound. Gilzer roared, the pain raw and real. Then Shane twisted the blade. The Gorian king staggered, massive limbs failing, eyes wide in disbelief. His glaive slipped from his grasp, clattering against the stone floor. For the first time, he looked afraid. Shane pressed closer, voice a whisper. "We're not prey." With a final brutal yank, he ripped the blade free, and King Gilzer collapsed. The silence was deafening. Vance's voice crackled in his earpiece. "I'm broadcasting his death across their entire planetary network." James exhaled. "Then it's over." Shane looked down at the fallen king. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't weak. It would not kneel. He turned toward his squad. Let's finish this. They had one more task. To make sure the Empire saw what happened here. The body of King Gilzer lay motionless, his massive frame sprawled across the obsidian floor. His once proud glaive, still crackling with residual energy, had fallen from his claws, the weapon of a conqueror rendered useless in death. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ragged breaths of Squad Alpha. Shane stood over the corpse, blade still clenched in his bloodied hand, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. The mission was nearly complete, but the weight of it pressed against his ribs like a vice. This was more than vengeance, more than survival. It was proof that humanity was no longer prey. Vance's voice crackled in his earpiece, breathless, with urgency. We're live. Every screen, every Gorian broadcast system. The Empire is watching. Shane looked up. High above, the throne chamber's vast holographic display had already begun streaming the footage. Across every outpost, every fleet, every colony under Gorian rule, the impossible truth was unfolding in real time. Their king was dead. James wiped the blood from his sniper's grip, exhaling. That'll shake them. Hayes, still clutching his injured ribs, gave a grim chuckle. About time they learned what we're made of. But it wasn't over. From the far end of the chamber, a slow, deliberate clapping echoed through the air. The sound was steady, almost mocking, and it sent a cold shiver down Shane's spine. Victor Hale. The traitor still stood, blood dripping from the wound Shane had carved into his side, yet his posture was eerily relaxed. His battle-worn armor gleamed under the dim firelight, his eyes alight with something dangerous, something unbroken. I'll admit, Hale said, his voice carrying across the room with unsettling calm, I didn't think you had it in you. He gestured toward Gilzer's lifeless form with an air of detached amusement. Killing a king, breaking an empire. Hell of a statement, Shane. But you should have realized something. Shane tightened his grip on his knife. And what's that? Hale smiled, slow and knowing. The Gorians don't fear death. They fear weakness. He stepped forward, rolling his shoulders, the servos in his Gorian-enhanced armor hissing with the movement. And right now, they're seeing a human standing where their king should be. The realization settled over the room like a creeping shadow. The Empire had just witnessed their strongest warrior fall. If Shane didn't end this the right way, if he didn't cement humanity's dominance, then this victory was nothing more than a fluke. Hale unfastened the clamps on his gauntlets, letting his bloodied helmet drop to the floor. Beneath it, his face was lean, weathered by war, but his eyes burned with conviction twisted into something cruel. This war doesn't end with Gilzer, Hale continued, taking another step forward. The Empire needs a new ruler, a new symbol of strength, and I intend to give them one. Shane knew what was coming before Hale even reached for his weapon. The plasma-edged blade snapped to life, glowing with a deadly orange sheen. Hale twirled it in his grasp, testing the weight like an artist preparing his final stroke. Shane met his gaze, unflinching. You really think they'll follow a traitor? Hale smirked. Not a traitor. He angled the weapon toward Shane's chest, his voice steady, confident. A warrior who proved himself worthy. No guns. No squad. This was the fight that would decide everything. Shane exhaled slowly. His muscles ached, his wounds burned, but none of it mattered now. He rolled his shoulders, loosening his stance, letting the tension flow through him. James stepped forward, hesitant. Shane, you don't. Shane held up a hand, cutting him off. This was his fight. Hale lunged first. The blade sliced through the air with surgical precision, and Shane barely twisted in time to avoid the strike. He countered with a sharp jab, aiming for the weakened spot in Hale's armor. But the traitor pivoted, catching Shane's wrist and driving a knee into his ribs. Shane staggered back, biting down a curse as pain lanced through his side. Hale was faster than before, his Gorian enhancements making his movements unnaturally smooth, almost effortless. Shane adjusted, shifting into a lower stance, forcing Hale to come to him. The moment the traitor lunged again, Shane dodged inside his reach, landing a brutal elbow to the side of his head, following with a sharp strike to his throat. Hale coughed, but didn't retreat. Instead, he spun, using the momentum to drive his blade down toward Shane's shoulder. Shane barely blocked in time, but the force sent him crashing onto his back. The heat from the blade seared the edge of his armor, a few centimeters from cauterizing his flesh. Hale grinned, breathless. Still too slow. Shane's mind worked fast, searching for an opening. Hale's enhancements gave him the advantage in speed and strength, but enhancements meant limits. They came with power surges, delay reactions, and most importantly, predictability. He feigned weakness, letting his breath hitch, letting Hale believe he was losing. The traitor took the bait. Hale surged forward, overcommitting to the kill, just as Shane had expected. At the last second, Shane rolled beneath the strike, his combat knife flashing upward, sinking into the joint of Hale's armor, right beneath the ribs. Hale let out a sharp gasp. Before he could recover, Shane twisted the knife deep, driving it between the servo points of the Gorian tech embedded in his chest. The effect was immediate. Hale's body jerked violently, the enhanced systems in his armor short-circuiting, spasming as the internal power surged out of control. He stumbled back, gripping at the wound, eyes wide. Shane pushed himself to his feet, slow but steady. Hale looked up at him, breathing ragged. His blade flickered, unstable in his grasp. He opened his mouth, perhaps to say something, perhaps to curse him one last time. Shane didn't let him. With a final brutal swing, he drove his combat knife into Hale's heart. The traitor froze. For the first time since this battle began, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then slowly, Victor Hale sank to his knees. Shane watched as the light faded from his gaze, until the man who had once been a hero, who had once fought alongside him, collapsed lifeless to the chamber floor. The room was silent. Then, without hesitation, Shane bent down, gripping the plasma blade from Hale's dead hands. He turned toward the still-active holographic broadcast, stepping over the fallen bodies without pause. Bloodied, breathless, but unbroken, he lifted the weapon high. "All of you watching," his voice was steady, carrying across the Gorian networks, reaching the farthest corners of the Empire. "This is what happens when you underestimate humanity." He tossed the traitor's blade onto Gilzer's corpse. "We are not your cattle. We are not your prey." He looked directly into the broadcast, his expression a silent challenge to every Gorian watching. "We are warriors, and we do not kneel." The citadel trembled, distant explosions rippling through its foundation as the Gorian power structure crumbled from within. Vance's voice came through. "Extraction inbound." Shane exhaled, turning back to his squad. Hayes, James, and Vance, battered, bruised, but still standing. He nodded. "Let's go home."